All right, well, I think let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jennifer Lyons. I'm the College and Career Information Coordinator at Magruder High School, and I'm very, very excited to have all of you here tonight and to welcome Celine Almazan, who will be presenting on accommodations after high school. So I will let Celine take it from here. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you in the coming days. If you have any questions, you can email me. You can find my email address on the Magruder High School website. And if you have any questions for Celine this evening, if you could just pop them in the chat, then she'll be very happy to answer them at the end after her presentation. Please do make sure to keep yourselves muted. I'm sure we all now post-pandemic know how to be in a Zoom. So take it away, Celine.
Okay, thank you so much. I was excited when Jenny asked me to come and talk about this topic. My name is Celine Almazan. I am an attorney in private practice in Maryland, mainly Montgomery County. I have 3 adult children now, and one of my sons had an IEP all through school up until he graduated, and I helped him with accommodations in college as well as the application. And then my youngest had a 504 plan in high school that transferred over to accommodations in college. I've been a special education attorney since 1980 for a long time, over 35 years, let's put it that way. And I have a lot of experience in IEP meetings and 504 and due process mediation and federal court litigation. I assist some families in post-secondary accommodations, but those mainly have had to do with students who find themselves in a bit of trouble and have to go before a disciplinary committee and helping them secure accommodations for those hearings. So nothing that you all want to think about as you prepare to send your kids off to college, but I just wanted to let you know what my experience is. We're going to talk today about accommodations for college, and I'm going to go ahead and start the screen share. Go. All right. There we go. I'm assuming that everybody can see this. Go ahead and start from the beginning. Okay, we're going to talk about post-high school planning for accommodations in college or post-secondary, whether that's community college or whether that is a 4-year university or 4-year college. This is my contact information. As I said, I am an attorney in private practice. I'm also the legal director for the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, which is a national organization for parents, attorneys, and advocates who all have children with disabilities in K-12 matters, and the attorneys and advocates who assist them. Okay, so planning for post-secondary accommodations for your student with disabilities. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I should have enough time afterwards to answer questions that are in the chat. You'll have my contact information. I'm going to send the PDF to Ms. Lyons, and if she can send that out, and that has my contact information. You know, and you can always Google me you have my name there on the Zoom. So planning for post-secondary accommodations. You need to start now. Don't want to scare anybody. I will say this, I am a firm believer that there is a college for everyone. And As you embark on looking at colleges, as you embark on applying to colleges, you need to start now to ensure that your child understands what their disability is and what kind of accommodations help them in high school and why they need them. If your child does not already attend IEP meetings, you need to probably start doing that now so that they can understand what their needs are. They can practice their self-advocacy skills, which is something they should be doing in high school, and mainly so that they know how to advocate for themselves, because when they go to college, you don't get to go with them, and they have to figure it out. Doesn't mean that you can't assist them, but the main driver of all of this in college is your child. It's not going to be you. So I can't stress enough that if you do not already have self-advocacy skills on your child's IEP, think about it. Think about adding those things. Think about maybe adding those things to a transition plan right now as a way to ensure that when your child leaves, they are able to articulate what they need and how they learn best. I always found with my son that at his IEP meetings, he knew what he needed more than I knew it and more than the IEP team knew it. So it's really important for them to understand that. So in Maryland, transition planning starts at age 14. The federal law says age 16. So transition is a formal process for planning. The IDEA added the requirement to the IDEA in 2004 because it was very important to the drafters of the amended IDEA that the purpose of the IDEA is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So that's all I'm going to say about the IDEA, because once a student exits with that high school diploma, the IDEA, the IEP, or the Section 504 plan does not follow them to college. So, hold on one second. Students need to be prepared to navigate on their own, looking at their self-advocacy skills. They are going to enter colleges and workplaces where there is no affirmative obligation for anybody to come up to them and say, hey, looks like you need this accommodation, or hey, maybe this will make classes easier for you. That affirmative obligation leaves, it's gone once they exit public school. And so remember that once you get to college, a student will be responsible for selecting courses, keeping themselves organized, managing their time, completing assignments, navigating the campus, communicating with classmates, roommates, professors. It's a good opportunity for them to practice what they might need when they exit college, what they might need in the workplace in order to be successful. So these are all of the things that we know that they're going to have to learn to do and understand all of the components to making sure that it happens before they leave your home. They're going to live away at college. So the Office for Civil Rights enforces Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It's been a law since 1973, and it's typically called Section 504. And it also enforces Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was enacted in 1990. Both of these laws prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. The main difference between them is that Section 504 protects students with disabilities from discrimination in any programs, whether they're public or private, that receive federal funds. Whereas Title II, there's 3 titles to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Tonight, we're only talking about Title II. The ADA prohibits discrimination based on disability in all places of public accommodation, regardless of whether or not an institute may receive federal funding. The ADA does not apply to religious institutions. Section 504 applies to all schools, including private religious schools, if the institution receives some amount of federal funding. Most do through grants and federally backed student loans. And Section 504 applies even if the school receives federal funding indirectly, so that if there is a grant that it is made up of federal funds that is organized to promote student mental health, the college would then become a recipient of federal funds. So that is the main way that Section 504 applies to colleges, is the federal funding that comes to colleges. If it is a private religious college, the analysis is still the same to see whether or not, under 504, the college receives any kind of federal funding. They may not have to, the private religious college may not have to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Title III specifically excludes religious organizations from having to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Both Section 504 and the ADA protect qualifying people with a disability from discrimination. So under both laws, a qualifying person with a disability is someone who has a physical or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a history of having such an impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. You'll notice with these 1, 2, and 3, there is no and, there's just a comma. So for number 2 and 3, if the person has a history of such an impairment, or if others regard them as having such an impairment. Major life activities include walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, learning, for our purposes here, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks. This is a broad definition, and so it protects a lot of people. 504 and ADA also apply to not just the students, but parents and employees on college campuses. They also protect people who, based on their association with someone with a disability, and protects people from acts of retaliation for asserting their rights. So that would apply to someone who is friends with someone who has a disability, and perhaps that person is advocating for the student on campus. They are protected from retaliation. All students who have an IEP in a public school have 504 rights. So it's not something that is triggered once you leave public school. And it doesn't mean that you also have to have a 504 plan. Students with IEPs, because they are students with a disability, are covered under 504, and that protects them from discrimination. That's a whole other session. And we don't want to get in the weeds, but I don't want you all to think that it magically happens that you get that coverage once you exit public school. You've always had it as a person with as a student with a disability, and as someone who has an IEP. So Section 504 and the ADA require an educational institution to provide reasonable accommodations to students with disabilities to allow them to access a school's programs and activities. Reasonable accommodations are accommodations that can be provided without undue burden to the institution and without changing the fundamental nature of the program being offered. They also require schools to both prevent and respond to disability-based harassment and discrimination that denies or limits a person's ability to participate in or benefit from programs and activities. The question is, can the student participate equally in learning and in extracurricular activities? The reasonable accommodations are an individual determination that colleges will make based on the documentation that is provided to the institution. So even though 504 and Title II apply to both school districts, as I just explained, and post-secondary schools, the responsibility of post-secondary schools does differ significantly from those of the school districts. In contrast to the IDEA, which covers students with IEPs right now, the 504 and ADA are broad civil rights statutes, and they are really designed to be anti-discrimination and ensure that there is a level playing field to eliminate barriers to entry or barriers to equal participation or barriers to something less than a benefit or service or program that everybody else gets if they who do not have disabilities. And they're also designed to ensure the comparable treatment of disabled and non-disabled individuals. So think of it as something to make things equitable. So who is protected under 504 and Americans with Disabilities Act? It's a qualified individual with a disability, as we just saw under the definition of 504. There were amendments to the ADA in 2008 that were in response to some overly restrictive Supreme Court cases that defined who actually was entitled to ADA protections based upon whether or not you had a disability that could be remediated through like medication or glasses. And Congress amended ADA to make sure that regardless of whether there was a device or there was a medication, you were still qualified as a person or seen as a person with a disability. And so it clarified the definition of a qualified individual with a disability much more broadly. Section 504 and Title II protect elementary, secondary, and post-secondary students from discrimination. In public school, K to 12, Section 504 requires the school district to provide a free, appropriate public education. It has the same sort of protections as IDEA does. The FAPE requirement, though, under 504 does not apply to post-secondary. You leave that requirement behind once you exit. The post-secondary school is required to provide appropriate academic adjustments as necessary to ensure that it does not discriminate on the basis of disability. So if a post-secondary school provides housing to non-disabled students, it has to provide comparable, convenient, and accessible housing to students with disabilities at the same cost. So they're not allowed to charge you more because you might need something that is more accessible for you based on that disability. If you meet what are the essential requirements for admission, so if you otherwise qualify to enter this university or college, the post-secondary school may not deny your admission simply because you have a disability. So if you are otherwise qualified to enter, you have the GPA scores that you need, you have the class ranking that you need, you have an SAT score, you have or an ACT score, or advanced placement requirements or IB requirements that you might need. If you're otherwise qualified, the fact that you have a disability and may need accommodations in college they cannot deny you admission simply because you have a disability. If you want accommodations, or as the Office for Civil Rights calls them, an academic adjustment, you have to identify yourself as having a disability. So you're going to have to let the school know that there is a disability if you want to ensure that you're assigned to accessible facilities, or if you want any kind of accommodation. Remember, the post-secondary institution is not obliged to locate or evaluate or identify somebody on its campus who might have a disability. The onus is on the family and the student to disclose that you have a disability and that you're going to need accommodations. And this is what Section 504 says, and it's essentially what I just discussed, is that you can't be denied the benefits of or excluded from participation in because you need because you have a disability, and it's all about equitable access. And 504 also has similar language, that a public entity like a public college shall furnish appropriate auxiliary aids and services where necessary to ensure that you have the equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of the program. So appropriate accommodations or academic adjustments are determined based on the disability and the individual needs. These can include arranging for priority registration, reducing a course load, substituting one course for another, a TTY in your dorm room, extended time for testing, equipping school computers with screen reading, voice recognition, or other adaptive software or hardware. Those are just some of the things that could be possible accommodations, but the onus is on you to provide the documentation that you require those accommodations. And remember, those accommodations cannot fundamentally alter the program that you are entering. And I'm not going to get super legal, but it does stem from I think it was a early 1980s Supreme Court case where a student who was hearing impaired wanted to be a surgical nurse in an operating room, and she was denied access to the program. And the Supreme Court said basically that she was not otherwise qualified because she was hearing impaired, and there were masks during the surgery, and it was a fast-paced environment, and people may not have been able to use ASL or sign language while they were operating to tell her what they would need. So she was not otherwise qualified. And the Supreme Court said that that the school did not discriminate against her by denying her access to the nursing program where she wanted to be in the operating room. So remember that you have to be otherwise qualified. So you otherwise have to meet the criteria for entering into the college or the honors program in a college. And then you get your accommodations after that. So as I said, you have to inform the school that you have a disability and you need an academic adjustment or an accommodation. Your post-secondary school is not required to identify you or to assess what needs you might have. The post-secondary school can require you to follow reasonable procedures, and you're generally responsible for knowing and following these procedures. Usually, post-secondary schools have information on the procedures and contacts for requesting an academic adjustment. There are whole departments that are set up in most private and public colleges that are disability services, which determines whether or not you are, and they're the people who determine whether or not you need the accommodation. You need to do your homework as you are looking for colleges to see whether or not there are going to be accommodations and whether or not the college has a history of not providing accommodations. When my oldest son was applying to colleges, he applied to many, and one of the colleges actually called me on the phone and said, after they had received his request for accommodations while we were pending the admission, and somebody called me from the disability services and said he needs too many accommodations. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said he needs too many accommodations. I don't think he can come to this school. And I said, is he otherwise qualified? Does he meet all the other does he meet all of the other qualifications, you know, the GPA, the SAT score, the ACT score, everything, the courses, everything else? And she said yes. And I said, well, I'm a lawyer and this is what I do for a living, and you can't deny him admission just because you think the accommodations are too onerous. And I was a little surprised that she even called me and admitted that perhaps he wasn't going to be a good fit if he was otherwise qualified. So it's important to look at what kinds of disability services are available, whether they have an established office, what it looks like, whether or not they're used to accommodating the accommodations that your child might need. So you're going to need to provide documentation showing that you have a current disability and that you need an accommodations or an academic adjustment. Schools can set reasonable standards for documentation. Some schools require more documentation than others. Your IEP, your 504 plan is not dispositive. It's not the only thing that you have to provide them with. If you have an IEP or 504 plan going into college, yes, disclose it, give them a copy of your IEP, give them a copy of your 504 plan, but you're going to need probably a new evaluation or a recent evaluation to document the disability, the diagnosis, how the disability affects a major life activity like learning, and information on how the disability affects your academic performance. And the documentation needs to have enough information so that the school can decide the appropriate academic adjustments. As I said, a 504 plan or an IEP is not sufficient documentation. You're gonna need to think about, there might be new demands in college, like time management, you know, particularly for some students who have executive functioning issues, you know, time management and some anxiety being in college. So you're going to need to think about what other supports your child might need going into college. The IEP, the 504 plan, maybe they address anxiety, maybe they address executive functioning disorder, but really you need an evaluation that is going to set out what kind of accommodations the student might need. If you have been proactive and if you've already asked for accommodations on the ACT or the SAT, you might already have that information. It just depends on where you are in the process, but you're going to need a new evaluation because that IEP is not going to cover it. If your documentation does not meet their requirements, the school needs to tell you in a timely manner what additional documentation you might need to provide. Like I said, you might need a new evaluation. Your high school and the post-secondary school are not required to conduct and pay for a new evaluation to document the disability and need for an academic adjustment. But if you have a student who might have been on a triennial and already evaluated in 11th or 12th grade, you might see if the college would accept that, since it's not going to be too old. But the onus is on you and the student to provide that documentation. So in order to determine, the school is going to look at your request and whether you're otherwise qualified, right, for the essential requirements of the relevant program that you want to enter into. The school is not required to waive or lower essential requirements in order to facilitate the student's entry into that program. If you request a specific academic adjustment or accommodation, the school can offer you that, what you've offered, what you've asked for, or an effective alternative. If the school is not on board with the fact that maybe you do have a disability, and they want to evaluate the student, they would need to do that at their own expense. That's not up to you. So if you, I've represented families who enter college, struggle, and get an evaluation after the first year of college, a good comprehensive evaluation, and then present that to the university or college, and you get accommodations that way. That is a possibility. So if you're not identified as needing an IEP or 504 plan, maybe maybe your child has been able to manage school up until so far, and you don't want, you've never wanted an IEP, you never wanted a 504 plan for your child, you've just depended on teachers to do the right thing through good teaching to accommodate learning styles. You're going to need to get an evaluation if you want something in college that's going to document what kind of accommodations your student is going to need. My experience with my sons was the disability services did work with us. And where my sons ended up going were those disability service offices that worked with me. There was one college in New York that my eldest son was very interested in, but they gave us a lot of pushback on accommodations, a lot. And it didn't leave us with a good feeling of, the next 4 years of struggle with accommodations. And I know those are all individualized decisions that you all make as a family, but do keep that in mind, that if you have a lot of pushback, what is it going to be like for the next 4 years for your student when they're not living at home and you're not there to do it for them, because you're not a part of the process. It's between the student and the disability services. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't check in on your child and say, did you notify the disability services that you have an exam on such and such a date? Did you tell your professor to make sure that exam is administered someplace else, because that's what your accommodations are? Of course, you're still going to do that to make sure that your child does all the things that they're supposed to do in order to get those accommodations. A school cannot charge students with disabilities more for participating in its programs or activities than it charges students who do not have disabilities. So they can't charge you a higher tuition rate because they're going to need to have accommodations for you. I found this website the other day. It's Maryland Department of Disabilities, and it's called mdtransitions.org/post-secondary education. And I thought it was really very, very informative. And thought it's a good place. It's a good place to start. Here are some types of accommodations. You're going to get the PowerPoint, but you get an idea. Electronic readers, closed caption, open and closed captioning, anything, keyboards with large buttons. If there's a library situation where your kid does not have their laptop and everybody else is using a desktop, that they should have a keyboard that accommodates them. And so off of this website, they have these 6 steps to request accommodations or other disability services. As I said, connect with the disability support services, make contact with that person, register as needing accommodations in college, learn about the disability documentation requirements, understand what the college or university is going to need. Typically, the disability support services, sometimes they have a different and additional application forms in order to receive services, the accommodations. So you need to check if there's additional forms that you need to fill out in addition to the general admission forms that you fill out in order to gain entry to the college. Again, it's all about asking for the information. It is an extra step. I understand that. But in order to be successful in college, these are all the steps that you all are going to have to ensure that you take for your child to be successful in college. Know how to talk about your disabilities and accommodations that work best with you. Discuss those accommodations that you've used in the past, what has worked, what you think you'll need while you're in college, and keep in touch with that person, especially after the student is admitted. Get in touch with them and make sure that you have all the documentation that you have and that you're going to be eligible for services. Make sure that you understand what those accommodations might be, either through a letter of accommodations that informs your professors of those authorized accommodations. Typically, the disability support services alerts the professors of those students who might need accommodations. Your student needs to talk to the professor and tell them that they're going to need these accommodations, that they're going to need from approved accommodations. Any pushback from the professors, they need to get in touch with disability support services. If your student does get pushback from a professor, I suggest that you go straight to the disability support services and ask them to intervene for you on behalf of your student. Mom cannot call professors, so that's something that your student is going to have to figure out. And having lived through 2 children going through college with accommodations that were 6 years apart, I will tell you it's not always easy, especially when you have students who might struggle with executive functioning and time management. As I said, there is a college for everyone. Not everyone has to graduate in 4 years. There are always classes you can take in the summer. Think about reduced course loads in the beginning for students as they enter freshman year, because it's a big change. There are a couple of case law cases. I don't know if you read about the Yale University settled a mental health lawsuit. Yale was sued by students who needed mental health services, and when they approached Yale, they were told to withdraw or take a medical leave of absence, and were encouraged to do that rather than Yale trying to accommodate them. The mental health issues that some students experienced, the court said, well, the the lawsuit alleged that the students who sued likely would have qualified for protection under 504 ADA if Yale had, chosen to explore that when they asked for accommodations, and instead of coaching them to leave or take a medical leave of absence. And then there's the class action lawsuit from 1996, where the students with learning disabilities, like dyslexia, specific learning disabilities, ADHD, sued because Boston University had very onerous testing requirements to prove a disability. The head of the college of Boston University thought that students were faking it in order to get an easier time in college. So there was a lot of bias and a lot of stereotypes that went into Boston University creating this labyrinth and onerous testing requirements to prove a disability. The Boston University was required to change the testing requirements, and the federal court called them out for believing in stereotypes and believing that students were trying to get identified in order to have an easier time in college. So finally, do your research for your colleges and universities, see what kind of disability support services they have. Talk to those people in the disability support services office. Your student has to do the advocating, make sure they understand what they need. Once they get to college, students need to talk to their professors. And then finally, make sure your transition plans in high school are sufficient for entering post-secondary. Really look at what those transition plans look like on your IEPs right now, if you've got an IEP. And make sure, if you have to add self-advocacy goals on there, do that. If you have to add, activities to assist with executive functioning, think about adding those kinds of things to your transition plan. The transition plan is not just things that you check off on that piece of paper on the IEP on that section. They can be goals, and they can be things that the student is working toward in order to ensure that once they leave, that they're ready for post-secondary and independent living. So I will turn it over to questions. Let me stop the share, and I'll open up the chat. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. Let me go all the way up to the top. To be clear, my child's IEP does not transfer with her to college. That's right. It does not transfer to college. An IEP does not happen. There's no place for an IEP in college. There's no place for an IEP in college. So you're going to have to help her with the documentation and get clear what kind of accommodations she's going to be entitled to, and then help her to make sure that she gets those accommodations when she needs that. How are self-advocacy skills taught by teachers? You can have an IEP goal that perhaps talks about, Susie will, prior to an exam, inform the teacher that these are the accommodations that she might need for the exam, that she has to take it outside. I thought that there used to be self-advocacy curriculum, but that might be for students who have cognitive disabilities. You can also look at self-advocacy skills as a supplementary aid and service on an IEP. And that could be measured by how many times a student advocates for themselves for their accommodations. If your child has accommodations for AP exams and SATs, do we need a new evaluation? It depends on when how old the evaluation is. That's why I said I think that if you got an evaluation for AP exams and SATs, you might be okay if it hasn't been too long. You need to determine per college and per university how old the evaluation can be. Can it be 2 years old, 3 years old, or does it have to be within the last year? All right, I just answered that next question. What would the timeline be for providing a new evaluation? Do you wait until your child is chosen in college and do it over the summer? It can take months to schedule, even if you're able to spend the thousands of dollars again. Yeah, I hear you, Eleanor. I remember. I would do it if you're a junior now. I would look to be looking in summer of before your senior year. If you are a senior now, I would try to get it after you contact the disability services office. I mean, maybe you have a student that might have been evaluated in their junior year by the public school system. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to need a new evaluation, and that evaluation will need to cover how the disability impacts their education and how it could impact education in college or university. I know it is pricey. The MCPS evaluation may only address those IEP needs unless it's comprehensive enough that, you know, maybe they talk about how the certain disability impacts the student without it being too focused on IEP goals. Ms. Brown, you can, there are a number of psychologists and offices throughout Maryland and in Montgomery County. I can think of the people that I have used in the past in Columbia, but I know that there are a lot of places that offer psychological testing. And if you want to contact me off list, that's fine. I can, if you want to email me, I can send you some referrals. I don't want to leave anybody out as far as evaluation people. So I just want to not leave anybody out. What is a note taker? In college, some people still write and not use their laptop, or maybe they do use their laptop to take notes. And the student with the disability might have an accommodation that that they get access to somebody else's notes, whether that's in writing, handwritten notes, or it's on a laptop. Somebody is taking notes and you would have access. The student would have an accommodation that they could get somebody else's notes every time after class. And it makes it easier because that can be emailed. There are colleges that have very strong disability services, and there, my list is probably pretty old, but if you Google it, there are colleges that are geared toward students with learning disabilities. My oldest son ended up at a private college in West Virginia that had case management services. And for him and who he was at that time, since he was going 5 hours away, that was important that he had a case manager. And as the years went by, the case manager was less hands-on, but that was something that we looked at. They're private colleges for the most part, and they have a history of educating students with disabilities. Who needs to prepare a transition plan? A transition plan is part of your IEP, and there should be a transition plan. If you have a student with an IEP, this only applies to those students. It does not apply to Section 504 students or to students who do not have an IEP or a 504 plan. But everybody who has an IEP beginning at the age of 14 needs to have a transition plan. And that's when the transition program person talks to you, talks to the student about what they want to do after school. And at 12, at grade 12, transition plan should be on your IEP. If you pull up the IEP, there will be a page that talks about a transition plan. Okay. Oh, Andrew, any suggestions on where to get an evaluation? Yeah, everybody is very busy. It is, there is a backlog. That what I would suggest is get on a waiting list if they have a cancellation, in order to get an evaluation. Yeah, I think that's what I would do. I had never seen an evaluation from like Kennedy Krieger or Children's Hospital or Johns Hopkins for post-secondary purposes. I've only seen private ones from, private practitioners who may or may not take insurance. I would just keep trying. And if you email me, I can give you some suggestions if you'd like, but they're going to be busy. And so you should probably just get on a waiting list. Would you please discuss pros and cons of informing colleges of a disability during the admissions process versus after the student has been accepted? I think it depends on what the disability is and how it impacts your student. I am a firm believer that accommodations in college make it much easier at the outset. And you don't want to be scrambling if you get the admission and then need to get the documentation, and then the summer or the spring summer goes past you and you can't get the accommodations and documentation in on time for the accommodations. If you're applying to a college that has a history of educating students with disabilities, like learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and you want those strong support services, then I would do it concurrently. If you have a student whose disability is enough to qualify for an IEP, but doesn't always need supports and services in every class, then you could wait until you get an admission and then try to figure out what you're going to need for accommodations. So it's just the timing is the only thing that I worry about, and being able, because everybody is busy. You're not going to be, once you get that offer letter and then you have to accept, you're not going to get all your ducks in a row in time to make a determination if you're going to get the accommodations that you need in order to accept and put your deposit down. Those are all decisions that you need to make after you've looked at the college or the university and are confident that it's going to be a good fit, and your student feels confident that it is going to be a good fit. My youngest son was determined to attend a college because of swimming, and we were fortunate enough that they had a strong disability support services. And so that was the reason he wanted to go there. And it just turned out, because of the swimming, it just turned out that they did have a good disability support services, which he absolutely needed in order to graduate with a degree. But that didn't mean that he didn't struggle that first semester, which is going to be a very real thing that happens. Kids struggle that first semester. My son's most recent evaluations were done before 8th grade. At his 3-year anniversary, his IEP team determined that the evaluations were still an average picture. They didn't order new evaluations. He's now in 12th grade, applying to colleges. We're worried that we won't have enough time to get a new evaluation done before next fall. How likely is it that college will accept those older evaluations as still being accurate enough? I don't think so. I really don't. I'm sorry. I don't think it's going to be. If it was 8th grade, I mean, you could try and tell the disability support office that this is what you have, and then see what you might need to supplement it. But remember that IEP is not enough. And you need to find out from each college or university how old that evaluation needs to be. So sorry, I'm not telling you anything that's good news. Finding out which colleges have that history of strong accommodations is a challenge. I mean, it is, I mean, full disclosure, we hired someone to help us with our first son, and whether that was a good or bad option, you know, I don't know, because at that time, there were, you know, you could look, if you looked hard enough, you could find something. You know, you could find a book that listed it all on Amazon, but we paid somebody to help us find a college, and she said that he had to do a gap year, and we didn't want him to do a gap year, so we went to college. So I'm not certain, even after all these years, that that was a good use of our time or money. But you know, there are people out there that do that for a living. And if you email me, or if you just Google it, I can get you some names. There are people that this is what they do. They help you find a college for your child and walk you through that. The good thing when we did it with this type of person is that she did tell us all of the things that we had to do in order to get as many services and the documentation that we needed. But even though she gave us a list of some colleges that were had a history, like I think my son went to Davis and Elkins. There was, I think it was Middlebury in Connecticut. They're all small private colleges. We still looked at other colleges that he was interested in because he was interested in culinary hospitality. Is there a way to ask questions about disability support services anonymously if students choose not to disclose during application process? You know, you go on the college or university website and look at disability support services and get a phone number and see if you can get somebody on a call to ask questions about what kind of accommodations that they typically offer, and what kind of documentation they might need, and the timing. My son is on a 504 plan, not an IEP. He does not have it. That's right. He does not have a transition plan. My son has an 504 for ADHD and social anxiety, evaluated by his middle school psychologist, and are being seen by Can the psychotherapist notes be used as evaluation documents? I don't think so. You need a real evaluation with IQ scores and things like that. Can you talk about summary performance at the end of high school? What are they used for? Who gets them? IEP or 504 students, or both? IEP students get that summary of performance as far as I know, I don't think that 504 students get them, but I might be misinformed about that. They're used for you and the student that they've met their IEP goals and that they're ready to receive their diploma. That's, I think that it's a requirement at this point, either federal or state, and nobody needs to see them. Like the college doesn't really need to see them. Really, what the college is not really interested in your documentation from secondary school. What they want is the evaluation. So does an SOP help get accommodations by showing their needs at the end of high school? It could be part of it, but it's not dispositive. It is not the thing that is going to get you the accommodations that you want. So this is not for the faint of heart. So you need to be prepared. Call your insurance company, see if they'll pay for an evaluation, or see what you can manage. Believe me, I know they're expensive. I've done it several times, and most recently did it again for my adult son. So I know that they are expensive, but what I want you all to understand is that those accommodations in college and university, you have to give them enough documentation so that you get what your student needs. I would strongly caution everybody not to roll the dice that first semester and see how they do without accommodations. Because once you get put on academic probation, that's kind of hard to come back from the second semester if you're already drowning, and you don't want to be there. I mean, you don't want to be there. And it could be that even with accommodations, you still fail some classes and you end up on academic probation, but at least you're not behind in trying to get the appropriate accommodations that you want for your child. It is not like high school. You're not going to be able to call anybody up and say, how come my child failed your class? How come they failed the exam? It's not like that. Doesn't mean that you can't still be involved, but it is better to do it at the outset, to be proactive rather than reactive. And the documentation for and an evaluation, I would strongly suggest that you all call and see how old that evaluation is, that they'll accept and go from there. But if you want accommodations in college or university, you're going to need to provide everything that the college asks for in order to get them what they're going to need in order to be successful. What are typical academic adjustments colleges offer? A separate location to take an exam, extended time to hand in an assignment. Some colleges or universities, you need to ask, maybe they'll waive a foreign language requirement. So it can be, the use of a calculator during an exam. It could be using somebody else's notes that are taken during a class. It could be being able to meet with a professor on a regular basis in order to understand what the student might need to do. So those are, additional time on a test that you don't have to finish it all at once. Be able to take the test somewhere else and not in the classroom with everyone else, maybe not even on the same day. It all depends. All right. I think that's all the questions, Ms. Lyons, right? I believe so. All right. Okay, I will send Ms. Lyons the PowerPoint tomorrow first thing in the morning. And, oh, is a private dorm room an accommodation colleges might offer? Liz, yes, and the only way I know that is because my daughter's best friend from high school got an accommodation for a private room with with her own bathroom. But I don't know if that is something typical, so you probably need to ask about that as well. But that's the only way that I know that is just through my daughter's best friend from high school. All right.
Someone just replied or sent a direct message to me that said, I work in housing at a college. It happens frequently, in response to that question
Yeah.
about private
Okay.
dorm rooms.
Yeah. So we can write, I'm sorry, I don't know
And
if
she means, I think she means, can we write about the, do you mean, can we write about the disability in the essay? Is that your question, Ms. Sang? Okay.
Sure, you can. If that's your lived experience, yes, absolutely. Okay. All right, I hope it was helpful. I'll send you the PowerPoint and that has my contact information on there.
Thanks so much to everyone for attending.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jenny, appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Sure, bye.
Have a wonderful evening,
Thank
everyone.
you, bye.
Bye.